Hello, hello, hello! Welcome to part 2 of our couples therapy series. So last week we talked about kind of the process of couples therapy from the therapist's perspective and like what the therapy session might look like and why you might want to see couples therapy. And today we're going to talk about kind of how to make relationships work and what elements of your relationship you might target with your therapist. So over the weekend, Kibby and I each read a different John Gottman book, so we're going to be pulling heavily from him. He is a very prolific couples researcher. This guy can predict, her book says, I think, up to 91% accuracy whether a couple is going to make it, whether a marriage is going to last. My book actually says he got up to 95. So this guy knows what he's talking about. He's got decades of research, longitudinal research, looking at couples, finding out whether they last. And so we'll be talking a lot about him.
I'm excited about this because it was kind of like a book club for us. And especially with the couples therapy episode, I know that we've gotten into a lot of conversations about what actually does make a good relationship. Is it really subjective? Is it about that ineffable chemistry love, or are there really like practical standards and guidelines that, you know, who's going to be the one, who's not? So we really delved into this really deeply. And I mean, I think it's really important now because especially with the pandemic, we've, you know, a lot of people just kind of potted up with their partner, right? And we've had such a limited access to like social interaction that the people that we live with and partner up with become that much more important. And, you know, I mean, we had personal experiences. I've gone through something recently where an unhappy marriage, gosh, it can really, really affect a lot, right? This is your foundation. This is your home. And I really appreciated reading this Gottman book. It describes how unhappy marriages, and people in unhappy marriages are 35% more likely to get sick. Mm-hmm. And there's all this research showing that they have, people who have unhappy marriages have weaker immune systems, and they can actually see it in their bodies. So this is not a small thing.
They die earlier too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for the record, when we say marriages or relationships, we're saying them interchangeably. Not everyone believes in marriage. Not, you know, it's not just heterosexual normative couples. We mean like all types of really intimate romantic partnerships. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Long-term partnerships, I'd say.
Yeah. So I read The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by Dr. John Gottman. Which one did you read again?
What Makes Love Last. Yeah. How to Build Trust and Avoid Betrayal.
Okay. So we're going to come at it for two different angles. My book was a little bit more, I think a little bit more with gave a little bit more tips and principles to look out for in terms of what would actually lead to a marriage crumbling and what didn't. So
yeah, mine's similar, but it's coming from a slightly different angle. It talks. It opens with the different kinds of betrayals that couples face, and betrayals. I mean, I think when we use that word, it's very loaded. You're thinking immediately of infidelity, or other massive betrayals. But he actually gets more granular. The little betrayals that we all commit at one point or another, or most of us. But that can really lead to fissures in the relationship. And then he spends a lot of time talking about ways to communicate that will kind of bridge those gaps.
That's cool. I can't wait to hear that. I want to hear. Yeah. I want to know about the betrayal. So, one thing that surprised me about reading this book was Dr. Gottman started out with myths that people have about what makes marriages work or not. And I really subscribe to a lot of them because it's really based on personal experience and how you want to explain why your marriage worked or didn't. And some of them really surprised me. For example, like communication styles or communication alone is not the key to a happy marriage, which might actually go against like what we said last time in terms of the couples therapy. And also what you tend to work on is like how you communicate through conflict. But just good communication alone does not actually mean you're going to have a happy marriage. It's communication about certain things, and maybe you can improve on those communication styles to talk about the deeper issues. But like, if the deeper issues are there, you could communicate really well, and that's not necessarily going to save you. So that was interesting to read. And just to also know that he says that neuroses or your own personality issues don't determine whether marriage is going to last or not. And that was kind of the funny one for me, because going through a divorce, we have a tendency to be like, well, that person's just a jerk and our personalities don't match. Like, he's an asshole or whatever. And it's just, we tend to want to just blame the character of the other person. Mm-hmm. But in fact, that doesn't actually determine. There's a lot of people who have all sorts of personalities who actually end up in these marriages with people who just accepted the way they are. So that was illuminating.
Yeah. There's some personal experience shining through.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that I mean, this is the thing I've been thinking about when it comes to what makes marriage work. It's like, is it something that happened? You know, does someone betray the other person? Does someone do something that really hurt the other person, and is that what happens? Or is it just like two people that don't fit, right? Mm-hmm. Is it just like a long-standing, like a poor fit, or is it what you do? And this book was really saying that it's not about either of those things, really. It's about the deeper issues and deeper values and connection between the two. So I just thought that was interesting.
One thing that I thought was cool, so a major issue that comes up with my patients, and certainly in my own life, is the person I'm dating the one? Mm-hmm. And the conflict is almost always between sparks and stability. So they might feel stable in their relationship, but there's a lack of sparks. Or the sparks were there in the beginning and now they're gone. And so much media portrayal of, you know, you just have this lightning bolt moment of knowing they're the one, and then you're off to the races. And I think that is what happens for some people. But Gottman has this quiz at the end of this book that is, what is true love? Mm. And it is a quiz with, let's see, 120 questions. And it's a
quiz. This is an exam.
Exactly, yeah, seriously. But the point is that only one of those questions, for instance, is, I feel like I am currently in love with my partner. Or, you know, like, we love kissing one another. Or these sort of sparks questions. And there's so many that are, you know, we fight together constructively. We forgive one another. We enjoy food together. We love to learn together. We operate with a sense of fairness. And basically, it's just like, if you both score 450 points or more, then your relationship is a keeper. So it's not, I think we all look for simplicity. We're all like, well, what is the answer? Am I in love or not? Like, is this the one or not? And this sort of shows that there are so many different elements that go into a successful partnership. It's not just any one of these things. It's not sparks itself.
Yeah, it's good to know. It's good and bad. I think, people come to therapists or these kind of quizzes or books wanting like an answer to say a yes or no, but it's always way more complicated than that. I did appreciate how simply this book did say that what does make a good relationship, like what actually really determines the quality of a marriage or relationship, is deep friendship, which I thought was so sweet. Deep friendship and like the quality of the friendship in the marriage is what determines its like quality or how long it lasts. And what I mean by that is mutual respect and enjoyment of the other's company. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's just so lovely to think about because if you really think about like a best friend or some really good friendship you have, it is a little bit more clear, right? It's like, yeah, with this person, I have respect for them. I admire them. I think they're a great person and great friend. Every time we're together, we enjoy anything we do together, right? Eating a meal, joking around, and we can answer those questions better with, when it comes to friends, both romantic partners. There is that, like, do we have that spark? Is the sex passionate? And yeah, and he was just saying that the quality of the friendship determines all of that. The spark, the romance, the sex, how long you last in marriage. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. I mean, it's so easy to get in the weeds when you're trying to determine whether somebody is the one, thinking like, are we matched on all these different metrics? Like, am I feeling the exact right way about them every single day? What are the red flags? It's so easy to lose the forest through the trees. Yeah. So, I like how he focuses on just, are you guys really good friends? And do you fundamentally respect each other?
Yeah, and I mean, as we're talking, I was also thinking about, it's not just that. He mentions also values, like really like a shared value as a couple, as part of the friendship. But, when I first read The Deep Friendship, I thought, like, my ex-husband and I were good friends. Like, actually, we started out as friends, and most things that we did together, we would have a good time, we'd laugh, But eventually it seemed like we didn't have the same relationship values. Now, when we talked about getting together and talked about building a family, we would seem like we're on the same page. Like, all the things I said I wanted, he said he wanted too. But when it came to actually in practice, like when we had to make daily decisions, I found that his decisions kind of ran counter, or like the opposite of what he said he wanted with me. So, I mean, hard to tell, but I think that we had a good friendship except for the part where we had like a shared value of like what we wanted the friendship to be in service of. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, I think you two also, the respect dimension wavered towards the end. I think because these values started being in competition and not living up to what,
yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about this what's called the four horsemen, which are four dynamics that kind of lead to a dissolution of a relationship. But I think you're right. I think we eventually didn't have the mutual respect, because when I saw that, I said I wanted this from my relationship, I wanted, hard work and to contribute and to be engaged in certain things, and, community and whatnot. And when I see him do the opposite, eventually the lack of respect came from feeling like, oh, you're not the person that you said you were. It's like that kind of, I don't know if this has anything to do with the betrayals that you're talking about, but it's kind of like, wait, I don't know. I don't think I know who you are. And I feel kind of lied to. And so that really wore away my respect for him. So yeah, I'm totally, we're not perfect. I'm totally at fault for, all the horsemen that we'll talk about coming up.
Well, let's talk about some ways to betray your lover. And then these are things that can lead to the four horsemen. Mm-hmm. So the first and the most interesting to me is conditional commitment, which is basically like, yeah, I'm here with you until something better comes along. So kind of always keeping in the back of your mind, keeping yourself a little bit open and not really fully immersing yourself in the commitment. He gives the example of two people who are together, but they keep running into fights because one will flirt, and I forget what the other one was doing, but they were basically both demonstrating the same thing, and they came to couples counseling to try to save their commitment, and they were surprised because Gottman was like, no, you actually need to start your commitment. It hasn't even started yet because it's been so conditional. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing, because it prevents you, for instance, from maybe fully forgiving your partner for things, because there's a part of you that wants to stay open for something else. So even though you resolve issues, you might not have a total commitment to like growing with them, because it's almost like a good excuse to keep the door open.
Well, what if, that's tricky, because having unconditional love for your romantic partner, that's the ideal, but how feasible is that? Because it's like, what if you come into the relationship and say, my condition for being married to you or staying with you is like, I want children at some point, and it's conditional on that, right? Like, what if there's like some reasonable things that would be, or if they're abusive, right? That's definitely conditional, right?
Yeah, I was feeling some guilt reading this part, honestly, because I don't really believe in unconditional conditional love, except for your children, basically. I think, though, what he more means is like, okay, if you have conditions that are inviolable and it won't work with that person, then okay, you split. But there's a difference between that and secretly thinking to yourself, I'm going to wait for something better to come along. Or like, I'm going to keep the door open in my mind or in my heart to something better. And I'm just sort of doing this for however long it kind of works, or because it's the best that I've got at the moment.
Okay, so like having one foot out the door kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, second is a non-sexual affair. So, okay, yeah, we all know what that means. Lying, I mean, a lot of these are pretty obvious. Another one I found interesting was forming a coalition against the partner. So this can happen a lot with mothers. So, if you rely on your mother for a lot of emotional support, you wind up, or like a best friend, you wind up complaining about your partner, only giving your side of the story, and then you two kind of have this coalition against the partner, and the partner is now suddenly debating two people, which isn't really a fair position to be in. So, yeah.
You know a little bit about that?
I know. I'm terrible at that. The one thing, though, is that Paul is also allowed to call my mother and complain about me.
Well, I think that, I mean, at least from being on this other side, when you do like form a coalition, it's a little bit more about how do I resolve this with him, right? It's a little bit more about like I wanted to talk and vent and kind of think about our different perspectives, but how can we come back together seems to be your ultimate goal.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I texted you and was like, "Oh God, I feel like I commit a lot. I feel like I commit a lot of these." I mean, even absenteeism or coldness. I've been accused of coldness by more than one person in my life. Withdrawal of sexual interest. You can't do that. You can't be excited all the time. I mean, come on. Come on, Gottman. Selfishness, breaking promises. I mean, I think taken as like general trends, it's clear how any of these can lead to a break in the relationship. But that's the other thing, is just there's an acknowledgement by him that we're all going to do these things sometimes, and it's how we then repair that's important. Yeah. 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 All
right, well, commit. Let's dive in and commit.
Yeah. You hear that, babe? I'm waiting for that ring. Then I'll. But he kind of talks about, like how these breaks can occur, and the betrayals are a component of this. But there's many ways for the betrayals to kind of inch their way through. So he talks a lot about sliding door moments, which are kind of like bids for attention. So if I'm talking to Paul and I'm like, "Oh my God, do you see how beautiful that sunset is?" And he's like, "Yeah, hold on, I'm working." Mm-hmm. Of course, that's reasonable for him to do some of the time. But if those accumulate, if there are all these bids, I'm trying to communicate with him, show him something, be together in experience, and there's a constant sense of like brushing me off, dismissing me, too busy for me, then we're leading ourselves into a trap. And that can be kind of a betrayal. There's that absenteeism or coldness. Mm-hmm. And so I think one step towards examining your relationship and working on it is to notice those sliding door moments and really engage. And Gottman says that we miss these sliding door moments the majority of the time, like 70% of the time. Mm-hmm. And because, like, especially for people with a baby, I mean, you're pulled in such different directions all the time. You can't possibly accept each bid. But I think a good place to start is basically, like, you recognize your partner is making a bid for your attention, and try something different, which is, like, putting down your phone, turning towards them, and really taking that moment to engage. And that's just a huge step forward.
Yeah, that's one of the tips we'll talk about in a minute. Yeah, okay. I think it's, I guess, if we just keep in mind that the main message of Gottman is that the deep friendship, and to foster that friendship, make it good, make it a quality friendship with mutual respect, enjoyment of each other's company, and shared values. Like, and the principles we talk about will seem to just fall in line with that general overview, right? Because we'll talk about the four horsemen, which are basically, unhealthy patterns, but they all strike to me as like things that you do when that friendship isn't there, right? And then the principles of fixing it is like strengthening that friendship. So I kind of like how everything kind of comes down to that. And yeah, if your friend is like looking at you wanting some attention, support, connection, and you turn away, right? That's if you turn away from that bid, right? You're just missing an opportunity to strengthen it. So
I just wanted one really cool thing. This is one of the ways he predicts which couples are going to split up, is he asks them how they met, or to tell a story of their early dating experiences. And he can tell by the transcript who's going to break up and who's not going to break up. Because people who are still in a healthy relationship, where there's still life in it, they'll tell really positive stories. There will be a sparkle in their eye. They'll focus on something good in their relationship. The people who are going to break up will focus on the negative. It'll be a kind of a grim story. And the same is true for people who had really rocky starts. So people who are in a healthy relationship might talk about the rockiness, but they'll focus a lot on resolution and how they overcame their obstacles, versus the people who are in bad relationships headed for demise will focus on just the rockiness of the relationship.
Should we talk about the horsemen?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So I think these four horsemen is like what John Gottman is most known for. So you probably, if you've heard about him or couples therapy research, this will sound familiar. But I think these horsemen are negative relationship patterns that really predict with a crazy amount of accuracy people who are going to get divorced. And in his research, he brings couples to the lab, have them sit there and talk about a conflict, which sounds like a nightmare, but actually could be kind of fun. But it's interesting. He says that like you can predict how the whole relationship and even the conversation is going to go within the first 3 minutes of a conversation. So even with just that snippet, he captured the four horsemen and was like, oh, there it is. There's horseman number 1, number 2. They're not going to last, right?
Yeah.
So the first one is criticism. So it's one thing to have a conflict over something that happened, right? If someone forgot to do the dishes or whatever. But if that turns into a criticism of someone's character or personality, that's that's number 1 horseman. Not just, I'm so mad because you didn't do the dishes, but you didn't do the dishes because you're a lazy son of a bitch, right? Right? So, I mean, and you can see that that's a sign of a lack of respect, right? Yeah. It's like lack of that part of that friendship.
I mean, while we're going through these four horsemen, did you notice these in your own marriage falling apart?
Yes, I found all parts of it. I tried not to critique. In the depths of some deep fights, I did say, you're not the man I thought you were, and kind of went after the character, right? Because I was trying to understand I think that's what we tend to do. We try to put together all of the betrayals, all of the small moments of feeling let down, betrayed, disappointed into like, is this an ongoing problem? Like, is this just not a good fit? Or is this something that I can forgive and was just it's a bad time, or things will get better, right? I was trying to figure out what was going on. And when I got really angry, I was like, no, this is just a you problem, right? Or it's often in my thoughts where this is a me problem, right? I criticize myself. I said, if I only was this kind of partner, if I did this, if I did that, maybe he'd be better. Maybe he'd like care and try harder, right? So there's like, I went to there in the depths of my anger. So yeah, I would say yes.
That's okay.
Well, the prediction is accurate. So
exactly.
So horseman 2, and this is a big one. This one is contempt.
Yeah.
So it's a criticism with an air of superiority, right? Like this. passive aggressive, sarcastic tones, right? This is all signaling lack of respect. Well, of course you wouldn't do the dishes. You're, as if you ever would. Eye roll, right?
I mean, just go on Twitter or Reddit, and you'll see contempt quite readily. Oh, yeah. So it's how people communicate these days online. But when it goes offline to your husband, then that's when you know there's a problem.
Yeah, it's a lack of respect, but also it's a distancing. At least this is how I felt. It's like a way to distance yourself from something that's causing you so much pain.
I mean, imagine thinking that. Well, I don't know if you have to imagine it's hard for the person feeling contempt too. I mean, nobody wants to be in a relationship where they just feel like their partner is just not admirable, not worthy of respect,
and vice versa. Yeah,
and, yeah.
I feel like this was definitely woven into a lot of what I experienced. I feel really bad about this, but I don't think I tried not to be openly mean, in general. That's just, I try. But, I mean, I'm sure even just, God, you could really feel contempt, right? You could kind of feel like whenever he disappointed me, I would just kind of be quiet and be like, okay, that's fine. Like, you could hear it, right? You could hear that I'm disappointed on a level of like, you idiot, kind of like, or you, like, okay, are you thinking about applying for a job now? Right? Like, dripping with contempt. And I try not to, but yeah. I don't know. This is a really shameful episode, guys. Like, please forgive me. I'm not a terrible person, I promise.
Well, but I mean, it wasn't like you're just a contemptuous, shitty person. I mean, there was a pattern of lack of respect on his end that led you to this. So it's not just like one partner is terrible and contemptuous and bitter. It's like that is a dynamic that can be spun over time, and it's contributed to by both partners.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the values conversation, and I just value honesty a lot. Like, I value reliability. That's, we've talked about this before, where a lot of my past, I have come to really rely on things that are like predictable and honest and like above board, so that I know what to do with myself and feel that kind of sense of security. But if someone lets me down, like, I really hope that, or like doesn't, can't hold their side of an agreement with me, like at least like some honesty and just like telling me that. And the constant lack of that led me to just like not respect the other person, because I feel like I was really clear, and I tend to be really clear that that's important to me. And if someone keeps disregarding it, I feel a lack of respect. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
So that in turn made me, feel contempt. So, ugh. Feeling a lot of shame right now, but let's keep going. Let's keep going into my hellscape. Okay, Horseman 3, defensiveness, right? I mean, that's, oh God, that's so common in conflict, right? It's defensiveness. It's like, it comes with lack of accountability on your end, right? Like, not taking responsibility for your contributions, and it's just kind of approaching the conflict like the problem is you, not me, right? It's like the example he gives is either saying this or thinking this, like, why are you picking on me? What about all the good things I do? There's no pleasing you, right? Like this defensiveness towards the other person of putting it all on them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that one's just, it's gotta be, I feel like people are defensive all the time. Like, this has got to be a really entrenched pattern for it to be a horseman, I would think. Just like inability or unwillingness to accept any responsibility in a fight, or to truly accept responsibility, or to, I mean, because that kind of shows like a lack of interest in actually resolving it. And again, there's a disrespect towards the partner there, because it's like, how could they possibly have a valid point of view? Right.
And I think it's like the one-sidedness, right? I think you could be defensive and defend yourself with acknowledging both sides, right? Like I did this and that wasn't great. However, I don't feel like your attacks are really, fair, right? But if it's like, well, you did this and you did that and I didn't do that, right? That's, it's basically like not admitting that you have a contribution to the problem, right? It's all the other person.
Yeah.
So that's a horseman.
And the fourth one?
Stonewalling. Yeah. This is one he says is seen later in the relationship, right? In the beginning, in the first year or two of a marriage or new relationship, there's a lot more like heated fights, more going to each other, trying to work it out. But later on in the relationship, it seems to me like almost like resigning. Stonewalling, I think we know it as like shutting down, avoiding, where it kind of looks like the person doesn't even engage in the conflict anymore. They're trying to ignore the other person or acting like they don't even care. Right? In couples therapy, I've seen it where the one partner just like looks off into the distance and goes, yeah, whatever, ugh, fine, I'm always wrong, I don't care, So, yeah.
It is the most maddening behavior probably of all time. But he does also make a distinction in my book about how stonewalling can occur in arguments all the time. And it's actually most likely to happen to men. And it's when the person gets flooded. Yeah. So they just kind of can't even handle the emotional experience anymore, and so they kind of shut down in order to protect themselves because they can't respond. And he had a reason for why it happens mostly to men. I think it has to do with hormones and like the evolutionary place of men as the fighters and protectors, and so they're more likely to get into a high emotional arousal in response to conflict, I guess.
Yeah, that is so cool because I think if when we tend to see men or a partner stonewall, which basically looks like just disengaging from the conversation, we would just kind of assume, oh, they don't care anymore. Like they're just this stoic whatever, they shut down emotions, or they're just so
immature.
Yeah, like we just have all these judgments about it, but really it could be that they have too much emotion. And you're right. There is research to show that actually men evolutionary should stay emotionally aroused more intensely and longer because they're out fighting and hunting. Whereas women, it makes more sense for us to calm down faster because we're feeding children and there's more oxytocin and better nursing if we are able to calm our physiological stress better. Isn't that awesome? Crazy? Right? Like it's just a funny, I think there's just too much out there that assumes that men don't have emotions and they're not, but really it's that they may have too much and they're just shutting down because they don't know what to do. They might be like walking on eggshells. They shut down because they're like, I don't know what to say that doesn't get me yelled at. Yeah.
So in my book, it went really far into communication around these problems. And so stonewalling, he refers mostly to it as flooding. So you really trying to avoid flooding, or when it happens to be able to kind of name it and then take a step back, take a break. One thing he says is that, so there's these sliding door moments and then they can lead to an unfortunate incident. So, you ignore your partner, or you there's a betrayal, whatever. And then obviously that spells trouble. But then there's two other things that can happen. One is, it's called the Zeigarnik effect, which is actually based off of the researcher who coined this was at a restaurant in Vienna and noticed that the waiters could memorize these very complex orders but then would forget them instantly as soon as the order was placed. And so basically the effect is that people have a greater memory for things that are unresolved than they do for things that have been completed, taken care of, whatever. And so that means that couples can have a greater memory for their conflicts and for conflicts that have not been resolved yet versus conflicts that have actually been resolved in a really healthy way. And so this can lead to sort of a negative bias. And then the fourth thing he says is that there's this sort of negative veil laid over the entire relationship where you just start interpreting neutral events as negative. You remember more of the negative of the relationship. And so you really like want to watch out for this cascading effect by getting to your conflicts quickly.
Yeah, it almost like the way he describes it too is like when the horsemen are riding free, right? That negativity kind of drapes over all the couple's interactions, and it's interesting to think that it almost kind of just sounds like they start to separate, like the individual partners start to just come away from each other and see every interaction as a sign of that other person being selfish, right?
Yeah.
Like they're doing this because they don't care about how I feel and blah, blah, blah. And they start to, Gottman also talks about this where over time, signs of a relationship ending are that the couple see the problems as severe and they don't even try talking it over with each other. They just solve the problems on their own and just assume it's not going to work with the other person. And they start to lead like parallel lives. They start to feel lonely and like they might be living together, but they just live in their own worlds where they have their own friends and inner life that it just doesn't, connect. And usually that loneliness is the thing that leads to affairs. It's interesting. He says that a lot of affairs are not, the relationships don't fall apart because there was an affair, but usually affairs are a symptom of all of these horsemen and problems that were there to begin with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm also a big fan of Esther Perel, and they are kind of opposed in a way. Actually, in my book, he gave a negative shout out to Esther Perel.
Territory wars.
Shots fired. Yeah. And I don't know. I have a conflict about this. I think, his experience is that of a researcher. And so the numbers don't lie. He's obviously seeing something. And I think it's clear that a lot of affairs come out of these suffering relationships. She sees clinically, I guess, what's happening. And her perspective is that you can actually have affairs in healthy relationships, but it's because the person who commits the affair is missing a part of themselves. They're missing their sexiness. They're missing their spontaneity. They and I think he talks about this too. When you meet somebody new, there's less conflict. You're all of a sudden looked at through these fresh eyes and adored. And but I like kind of combining these perspectives because I can certainly see where she's coming from, that in a relationship, especially one that has gone on for years and years and years, you become a part of a dyad, and only certain parts of your relationship or certain parts of yourself might be exercised at any given time, because you are so committed to this other person and you work together in a particular way, and you begin to miss these sort of forgotten sides of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are a lot of articles coming out now about how our views of marriage and our expectations of marriage are shifting dramatically over the generations. Now we are in a place where we expect that other person to be everything. Emotional supports, someone who mysterious, intrigues us sexually and but also takes care of our children. Like all these things in one person. And maybe it's a issue of expectations, but I always remember what our first supervisor, Dr. Batson, talks about. Whenever we have an individual therapy case who's talking about my marriage doesn't work, or I'm with this person, we have these conflicts and I don't know why. He always encouraged, at least me, to ask the patient what about their, what he called relationship blueprints. Like what do you expect out of a relationship? And a lot of them are based on early experiences. The way you saw your parents, the way you saw, another couple or relationship that, what were you taught as a kid that it's like in the back of your mind as a blueprint that comes out when you're actually trying to make a family yourself. But like, what role do you expect your spouse or partner to take? Is that person going to be the breadwinner? Is that person going to be your emotional support or not? Like, that person is just there to be my hubby and I turn to my friends for emotional support. So like, all these can have some values in there too. Like, a couple, when I get married, it's for the sake of being a power couple in our field, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have those blueprints, but aren't aware of them. Yeah. Except when they start, and when they, match with someone, they could either be in sync and have similar ones, or, you realize that there's like some friction around that, right? Like, wait, that person expects me to be the breadwinner as well, or to make money as well, but like, I don't want to. And that could just be, symptomatic of like deeper blueprint mismatch. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think you might not realize you have your own blueprint, and you might not realize how variable the blueprints are. I think a lot of people go in, I mean, there are like general societal expectations, like for monogamy, or one that I've struggled with, and definitely struggled with Paul in the first year of our relationship, was I think he had more traditional expectations of a relationship, and it was very easy to judge my expectations as unreasonable, when in reality, to me, it was like, no, this is the kind of relationship I want to have. You have your version of the relationship you want to have, and we need to figure out if we can fit them. It's not, am I unreasonable or deviant? It's like, no, this is just the relationship I want to have. So for instance, staying friends with exes, having strong male friendships, potentially being polyamorous at some point. I think we closed the door on that, but I don't know. Seems like, well, no, never mind. Yeah, so I think it can be easy, especially if your blueprint is something that is fairly common societally, to not examine it very deeply, because you might actually realize once you examine it that it isn't all that common, that you have your own unique needs and expectations and they need to be communicated. And it can also lead you into judging your partner or thinking that your partner is unreasonable, when actually what would make your partner is unreasonable is if there is no fairness in the exchange, if there's disrespect. If I said I want to stay friends with my exes, but you're not allowed to stay friends with, you're not allowed to have any female friends whatsoever. So I think it is really worth like deeply getting to know your partner and their expectations, and to not make assumptions about what kind of relationship they want, but to really talk about that up front. Or as soon as you can, as soon as you're aware that there might be a mismatch. Did you find that you had a blueprint mismatch?
Yeah, and I this is one of the things that reading through the book, it's like, is it all about the blueprint mismatch, and is that what makes couples fall apart or not? Is it that you need to find someone who has the same exact expectations and values about a family as you do, and that's the answer? And just reading Gottman, I don't think that's really the answer. It's really about the respect for each other's, and to see if you can make a compromise and find common ground, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, like, Paul and I definitely did not have the same template, and we've just come to mesh them.
Right. And I think especially that's coming from the mutual respect, right? Like, because, for example, we had a huge template mismatch, I think. And of course, this is in my view. If who's listening, anyone else is listening, I'm sure it's a completely different story. I totally understand that. But it's in my template that both partners contribute equally. And my template was that both of us would work, both of us would take care of the kids, both of us contribute in whatever way they could, but equally. Mm-hmm. And he said his was to contribute equally, but it seemed that in his template, I don't know if he was aware of it, but this is what he grew up with. So one person is the breadwinner and one person isn't, right?
Yeah.
And I was willing to say, okay, fine, I could be the breadwinner, or I could be the one who's working. I'll make that work as long as there's like equal contributions there. Like, okay, if one person's doing all the work, the other person's doing all the other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. But but I think I was able to get. At first, I was upset that he might have not had the same template of both people working, both people taking care of the kids. But I was willing to compromise and respect that it still could be an equal contribution, but the content and the rules could be different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's possible to come together with different blueprints and have mutual respect for each other's, and not just say, well, it's stupid that person thinks that a man should do this and a woman should do that. But, but having respect and seeing if there can be a common ground where you maybe there's an overlap with the blueprint, maybe like, the living rooms can be the same. And if that's enough to maintain, that kind of respect and shared values for a relationship, I think that could help.
I would also add this, and I'll get your thoughts on whether you think it's reasonable. I think there are blueprints that you see as reasonable and that you're like, yes, totally makes sense. This is what I would back if I were using my reasonable mind. But there's also this element of attraction, and it's like, how am I going to feel most alive and attracted in this relationship? And I think that can actually be at odds. For instance, I totally believe that both partners should contribute equally. However, I am more attracted in my relationship or to Paul when I am treated like a bit of a princess. And one thing I love about Paul is that he just like, the way he demonstrates love is so big and so impressive. It's like you can't find the bottom of it. It's like, it's just so expansive, and it's like attractive to me to see that. Even though it might not be fair. So I don't know. I just think like one thing that helped me in my relationship was being like, I have these things that I believe rationally, and I have these things that I'm attracted to. And is there a way to make those work? Like,
I don't know. I think that attraction, we could do a whole episode on this, or maybe we should. The attraction in a long-term relationship, at least this is my experience. We should dig into the research for this, but it's not only just physical and sexual attractiveness, but it's a pull and a draw to someone that you respect and admire.
Yeah.
And if there's a role that you don't admire, then I feel like it's a little bit more of that, that piece of respect that's like a good foundation for attractiveness, and feeling, even if the feeling like, ooh, the little flutters when you see them around often comes when you do admire them, right? And
yeah, all I'm saying is, like, I think that you can run into trouble if you agree to something that you rationally believe, but that you're not actually going to do because it doesn't make you feel like it doesn't feel comfortable to you. It doesn't feel natural. You're not attracted to it. Like, I think as honest as you can be about, like, what actually pulls me in a relationship, and like, is that something I need to fix or adjust, or is this something that can exist well in this relationship? Just like being able to voice that and talk about it, I think can be helpful, instead of pretending that you're a perfectly virtuous person who, like, of course, has all of these lofty ideals about how a couple should be.
Yeah, I find myself really attracted to people who, I value givers, for people who say, I'm going to do my very best to pay attention and give to other people around me and help them feel comfortable, help them give them what they need. Mm. I think when I was younger, I used to be attracted to something else. I used to be attracted to the charismatic, more self-involved. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because they people who could draw attention towards themselves, and that's their contribution for whatever value that is. Because I didn't want to see myself. I wanted to just dissolve into someone else, like a good TV show, right? And as I grew older and wanted myself to be seen too, and had my own needs and started to come into my own, it shifted. And so, That's
such a great way to put it. Because I've also been attracted to that kind of person. And I would say that Paul is a giver. But prior, is just like, maybe it was me not wanting to see myself. I think I did love just being catapulted into just a feeling frenzy and just like not having to sit and stew with the boring and the everyday and the quotidian. Like if I could just be in this feeling frenzy and just like be riding beside this person with all their charm and charisma, and then we didn't have to really take a look at anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay for your values, our values and the things that attract us change over time. I think that we're like, why is it that we're dating this kind of guy
God,
now?
it can change over time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, for a really good reason. I mean, we're in the state that we want to have a family, and and my goals when I was in my 20s were something different. Was exploring, was excitement, was like looking outward, and now my excitement would be to have the stability that I could focus on creating life, creating something else. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, I think that that's when my relationship, like family making blueprint is coming out where it didn't before, where it's like, okay, how does one make a family? Right. Which is so different than what I wanted when I was 20, and I just wanted to like lose myself in a sexy, exciting man where I'm nothing. Like I'm just an audience member,
Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to talk real quick about how to make some of these amends, how to really like work through a conflict. So Gottman suggests, I think it's really cute. He suggests having a State of the Union meeting every so often. And at first, when you do State of the Union meetings, you want to talk about a recent disagreement. And then once you get some practice with that, you can talk about kind of fundamental issues. But both the speaker and the listener have their own jobs to do. And he provides these really cute transcripts where they keep going off. They keep going off target, they keep like falling into defensive-ness or criticism. And then you can see them go, no, sorry, that's what we're not supposed to do. Okay, what we're supposed to do is this. So one thing he says, I mean, using I statements, we've all heard this advice, but he kind of takes it further by saying, when you have a criticism, what you should actually look at is the wish behind that criticism. If you're feeling angry, what is the goal that's being blocked? And Kibby and I talked a lot about this in our anger episode, but instead of expressing the anger, if you really just peel that back and get at what was the thing that I needed right now, and then if you could communicate that, that'll be a lot more effective. Instead of you're such a lazy motherfucker, how could you not do the dishes? It might be, I really need to be able to unwind after a long day at work. It would be so helpful if you could prioritize helping me with the dishes, helping me with this housework. And he suggests really getting clear about your needs, and you can do this together, where you write down your inviolable needs, either from the conflict or overall. So, if I'm trying to think of a recent conflict with Paul. I mean, like, whatever. Like, if we had back in our first year of our relationship, we fought a lot about our relationships with friendships of the opposite sex. So I could make an inviolable need. I need to have male friendships. Or I need to maintain my friendships with these exes. But then you can work in flexibility. But I can be flexible about making sure you know where and when I'm going to hang out with them. I can check in with you. You can meet them first, whatever. So you kind of start with like, what can I not compromise on? But then you say, within that though, what compromises can we make? And then the other person does that as well. So you're really problem solving together. But you're keeping it needs focused, not criticism focused. And then really trying, before you get defensive, to make sure that you can word the other person's perspective in your own words. So, okay, what I'm hearing is that when I hang out with male friends, it makes you feel humiliated, threatened. It feels like something that's inappropriate for a girlfriend to do, whatever it is. Like, I don't know. It makes you feel abandoned. Like, I've you feel as though I'm not checking in enough and that could be a sign of disrespect, whatever it is, you try to word that until they say, yes, you've got it. And then you can go on to your perspective. So I like that he puts this in the context of State of the Union because it's an unnatural way of talking. Like if you're in the heat of an argument, it's going to be hard to use these principles. But if you can stop and say, we're going to plan this meeting. We're going to use these principles. It's going to sound silly, but we're doing this because we know it works. Then that can be pretty powerful. And beyond that, just empathy, validation, actually listening to the other person, a splash of humor where it can make sense, all the things we've talked about before.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're talking about is like damage control. Like how do you work through conflict? And a lot of the things that you're talking about are things that we would actually walk through in a couples therapy session. So I think a lot of people tend to go to couples therapy if they can't do this on their own, right? If they can't have a state of union without, kind of devolving, it helps to go to a couples therapist to have someone mediate and kind of make this happen. And so they get enough practice so maybe they could do that on their own. So that's really cool. And beyond that, like even if you don't have these deep conflicts to work through, Gottman in my book actually gives a couple of principles of making marriage work. I see this as a little, not just conflict resolution or damage control, but like enhancing, right? Strengthening something, making it better. So this could actually apply, these tips can apply to relationships that don't have like really deep seated issues, but, just kind of need a little bit, little spice, little lift. So he gives 7 in the book, but I'll only go through the first 3 because this is like the first steps. And then you could buy the book if you want to. We're not being sponsored by it. I just want to make that clear. We just like them. Okay, so the ones that he gave the first 3 was 1, enhance your love maps, which love maps he calls a part of the brain that stores information about the other person. So it's really just getting to know the partner, getting to know your partner and yourself. What do they like? What do they not like? Who are their best friends? What is their inner life like? What is their favorite food? What are their dreams, right? Just getting to know them. And it could be just, this is what dates sometimes are for, sitting down and talking about these things. Or you could do cute little quizzes where you just ask each other these things. So get to know them better as a person, right? Mm-hmm. The second one is increase admiration and fondness. So it's like retaining that fundamental sense that the other person's is someone to be respected and liked. And that could be like reminding yourself of their good qualities, reminding them of why you like them, engaging activities that you enjoy together that kind of puts them in a great light, right? Like if there's something that you used to do early on in your relationship that attracted you to them, do that and kind of like I kind of like this kind of stepping back and looking at them with some admiration, right? Just... Mm-hmm. And the third one is, we've kind of touched on this, but turning towards each other versus away, right? With these bids of connection. Instead of turning away to your phone or to your friends, turn to that person like a teammate, right? Like turn to each other for support. Do things together that you enjoy together, like common interests and things like that. So all these principles to me sound like strengthening a friendship. Right? Yeah. It's like, what are the building blocks of good friendship? Well, you know a lot about that person. You know their likes and dislikes, their fears, their dreams, everything. You admire them and you enjoy things with them. And you turn to them, mm-hmm. for help, for support as like a collaborator.
Yeah.
So those are nice little tips.
Yeah. And I think along with just like really admiring your partner, he talks a lot about how making negative comparisons can be pretty poisonous. And that can happen a lot when your commitment is conditional. Because if you're always kind of waiting for something better to come along or you're 1 foot out the door, you're going to constantly be making negative comparisons. So I think really turning to gratitude and trying to make positive comparisons or just sort of talking to yourself about like, what am I grateful for my partner? And if you can tell that to your partner, that's even better. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll wrap up here. Thank you for listening to our John Gottman book club. 2 things we really left out of this discussion. We're going to do separate episodes on are infidelity and sex. So we have not forgotten those topics. We know they're hugely important to couples therapy and relationship health, but they need a larger floor. So, Kibby, want to send our resources their way?
Yeah, the book I read was The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by Dr. John Gottman. And what was the book that you read?
And mine is What Makes Love Last.
Both are
Tons
great.
of other
Check
books
them
out there, but yeah, John Gottman is such a prolific and successful researcher. He is the head of the Love Lab at University of Washington, I think, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, lovelies. Thank you for listening to our love episode. And as always, if you want to show us some love, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, and we will see you next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.